I am Bernardin. I'm one of the co-chairs of this session. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also grateful to people who support us in the program, and I want to congratulate the organizing and the scientific committee again, because this is such a fantastic and outstanding meeting. So we had La Fondation Paralysie Cérébrale lecture, which is a chapter in the history of the EACD, and so I thank the Fondation and Emma yesterday. Later today we're going to have an Alsace lecture, and now I'm very happy to chair this McKees Press lecture, and the McKees Press lecturer is Laurent Servais. Just saying this name might be evocative of a lot of things to you. You know that Laurent looks very much like me. He still calls me his godfather for some reason. Laurent was always bright since the moment he was born, and it's very important in newborn screening. Laurent has a very vast culture, a keen ethical approach to children and families, and skills in translation medicine. He has been instrumental, in particular, in promoting the transition from discoveries of approaches that have changed the outlook of Wernicke-Hoffmann syndrome, as we used to say, SMA type 1. And I remember for many years in my job as a pediatric neurologist, it was a big challenge to make the diagnosis early, because we should know about the gloomy prognosis when suggesting management to parents of a newborn child with SMA 1. And then Laurent has set up really newborn screening and helped us move forward with personalized medicine. And he's going to share some of these insights with me. And I think these insights are transformative for the field. I'm very happy to welcome Laurent Servais. Who is a professor at the University of Oxford. And is still also in Liège, which is like a twin city to Oxford.
We call it indeed the Twin Cities. Thank you so much, Bernard. I don't see any pressure after such an introduction. Okay, and you don't know, but I call you sometimes the Godfather because of the movie. Just wanted to state it publicly. So thank you very much for being here. For me, it's an incredible honor to give this keynote lectures. And you know, such an habit is to change the title of my talk before giving it. So rather than this quite dry title, I prefer to call it a story, a hope, a dream, and a vision. Because I'm not going to show you any data. I mean, we have no time for that. We're not going to look at figures. We're going to speak about concept, ideas, and I would like, after this talk, if possible, that some of us could go out of the auditorium and say, well, why not? So first of all, I've got a lot of conflict of interest. You can take a picture and read it to get sleepy tonight. And now I'm going to tell you the story. Once upon a time, in a small city, in a small kingdom of Belgium, of Europe, I will not name the country, just to say that they are very good fries, chocolates, and waffles, and a very important EACD meeting next year, where you are all warmly welcome. So once upon a time, in this small city of a small kingdom of Belgium, we could still see this kind of patients with proximal weakness, with no fascial involvement, with the need of a gastric tube and non-invasive ventilation. A child was probably deemed to be normal at birth. All of you have recognized spinal muscular atrophy type 1. And for those who have the chance not to know this disease, let's recapitulate the key signs: it's bright eyes, smiling, and seductive attitude, just like Bernard. Hypotonia, but yes, not so much hypotonia. Truncal, proximal, lower limb more than upper limb, areflexia, and tongue fasciculations. That's really the key signs, and few contractures and facial weakness. This disease is related to the absence of a protein that is called survival motor neuron protein, and it causes the death of the motor neurons. And this protein is caused by a gene that is called SMN1. And interestingly, and this is key for what's going to follow up, nearly all patients have the same mutation, which is a deletion of exon 7 in the SMN1 gene. Even the less severe form, the type 3, if we can call less severe a form in which you lose ambulation at the age of 10 years, right? It's just because we benchmark with SMA type 1. But all these patients have the same mutation. It's because they have another gene that is called SMN2. It looks like SMN1. It's just like SMN1. It has the perfume, the taste of SMN1, but there is a small mutations, and because of this mutation, there is no exon 7 in the protein of SMN1. That comes from SMN2. So in 2016 came the first phase 3 trials in this disease, and we had several approaches. One of these approaches was to bring an oligoantisense nucleotide that interferes with the splicing of SMN2, and the second one was to bring a brand new gene into a capsid. So as I told you, the first trial was achieved in 2016 and published in 2017. And the key conclusion was the following, is that it was a double-blind sham procedure control study, which means that we were just comparing patients who were maybe not treated and we didn't know. And there was a major difference in survival if these patients were treated early, less than 13 weeks of disease duration. If you could not treat these patients within 13 weeks of disease duration, you could not see any difference in event-free survival. So, as I told you, we're not going to discuss about data, but about patients. This is one of these patients in this trial. Look, he has a typical phenotype of SMA type 1. And we didn't know if he was on treatment or not. And this patient started to do things that we were not expecting in a SMA type 1 patients, like rolling from back to prone. He acquired the sitting position, and he did something that is completely useless, which is to work on the computer with your hands in your back, not looking at the screen. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, and he continues to improve, and that's the last video that Mom sent to me. He has a severe scoliosis. This child is alive, but he remains with a very significant disability. And look, by the way, the bulbar issues, and these patients, as many more patients, and we more and more understanding that presents with some kind of autistic spectrum disorder and some communications difficulties. We just published this paper, and there are 2 or 3 other papers that have just been published or that are being to be published to show the motor delay of these patients, but also the delay in the communication and the global intellectual delay of these patients with SMA type 1. Something that we were not aware of because these patients were dying before, but we're discovering these new phenotypes of patients with SMA type 1. So as I told you, second approach to bring in a new gene into the cell with an AAV. It's a one-shot therapy. It was published in the same edition of the New England Journal of Medicine. And rather than presenting this data, I could present you the story of 2 kids, Jack and John. John is born in a country where there is good wine. The cheese is okay, but I don't like the way they play football. They just, they're not for good game. And Jack is born in a country where there's good waffles, good chocolate, good beers. A very nice congress next year, by the way. beautiful city. And they have the same disease. And I'm going to tell you the story of, it's a storytelling lecture. I'm going to tell you the story of this patient. This is John, the little French man. As you see, he had SMA type 1. He could be injected at the age of 4 months, and he is doing better. He survived. He is able to eat by himself. He has a scoliosis, and we should know that we know nowadays that actually patients with a scoliosis will continue to progress with the scoliosis, and there is nothing that stops the scoliosis. He's a painter. Look, he's a very good painter, and he entered school recently. He's a happy kid. He's a fantastic happy kid. But he will never walk, right? And then the story of Jack. I'm not going to tell you the story of Jack right now. I'll tell you later. So this was the hope, right? This was the hope of, in these terrible conditions, to see the light and to see, you know, to think about a different future for these children. And then back 2017, I met this family, and this day was transformative for me. They are brothers and sisters. The brother is affected by SMA type 1C. He came at the age of 11 months. He was with his mom, was pregnant of the little terror on the bed. She is also affected, and mom asked for the treatment for the 2 kids, one who could receive the treatment after the onset of symptoms, long after, and the other who could receive the treatment before the symptoms. And that's the magnitude of difference. Within the same family, between a patient who has received the treatment for spinal muscular atrophy, at that time was nusinersen, before the symptoms, and look, she's able to make bodybuilding with the smartphone of mom, and this guy, treated after the symptoms, doing much better. He survived. He keeps the sitting position. He's able to take my finger. He will not do it because he doesn't understand this Polish, but if you translate, look, then he uses all his muscles, and finally he can do it. And he will tell me, okay, but you know, this is, you know, short term. Maybe later on she will develop the symptoms. Let's take out the DeLorean, you know, the machine to go in time. 1 year later, the brother is still supporting his head like this. And this is what she does if she wants to look at her in the mirror. So there is, like in YouTube, don't do it at home, right? Okay, let's go 1 year later. Okay, she survived. Okay, no head trauma that day. So we invented a new test, which is carry your baby in the stairs. She reached the ceiling effect of the test and the stairs. And then we invite a new test that is directly inspired by our experience in Belgium and this sport into which Flemish people run in the mud with the bike. She does it very properly. I love this video. Same disease, same treatment, a couple of weeks of difference. I love this video because we see that pre-symptomatic patients help actually post-symptomatic patients. If we were only treating post-symptomatic, we would have many more patients like this. So the resources that we use for pre-symptomatic, we don't use them, that we do not use for pre-symptomatic, we can dedicate to post-symptomatic patients. And this is the last video I have. Look, this guy works a lot, and I insist on the importance of standard of care. He's able to pick up his little toy. Unfortunately, soon we'll go to surgery because of the scoliosis. And the sisters, who has the same disease and the same treatment, is doing perfectly well. Just the magnitude of difference for a couple of weeks. This is not the only case. This is another a family of mine with the younger sibling was being treated before the symptoms and the elder after the symptoms. So when you have the story of such a hope, of such a difference between pre and post-symptomatic treatment, I can tell you that every day you think about newborn screening, and every night you dream about newborn screening. You dream of not being in need of a scale to measure the progress of our little angels, to keep them on earth, doing well. in the same condition that this little terror. So we started back in 2018 our project Sun May Arise, SMA, on Facebook. You can follow it. After 3 years, it was a great success. We screened 200,000 newborn, identified 16 cases and treated. It was a lot of mainstream media involvement. And this screening is based on qPCR. And as you can see, there is no matter of comparison between patients who have the homozygous deletions and patients who are actually heterozygous. So it's a 100% accurate test, which is fantastic for newborn screening. And now I can tell you the story of Jack. Jack was born the same date than John, who has the same disease. Is born in the northern part of southern Belgium, where there was no screening at that time. Actually, no, the parents were living there. But thanks God, mom delivered in Brussels, where there was newborn screening. And Jack was identified. So this is Jack when he was 41 days. I'm not entirely sure he's completely asymptomatic. Maybe he has some proximal weakness. But this is Jack 11 months later. He has acquired ambulation, and he was actually the first patient in Europe to be treated at birth with gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy. And if we go a little bit later in time, Jack is 3 years old. He became a doctor. I told you these kids are bright. And obviously he became a neurologist. And as a patient who could have been affected by spinal muscular atrophy, is very careful of taking reflex. As I told you, spinal muscular atrophy is associated with some areflexia. And is he doing, joke aside, is he completely normal? Probably not. He is not completely normal. He still has some proximal deficit, but we treated too late. It was just the beginning. I mean, we were just doing our best, but 41 days is too late. Newborn screening is important, but it's not enough. We need to work hard on our processes to get the treatment in as soon as possible in these patients. And when it comes to define patient journey, this is a matter of days. We need to struggle to gain any single day to give these patients the brightest future. Jack could be included in a study for pre-symptomatic patients. He was one of this line that was recently published in Nature Medicine. And outside Jack, may I introduce you another kid from southern Belgium who has greatly contributed to the approval of risdiplam for patients less than 2 months in the US. She was included in the study Rainbow Fish. And this one who is walking at the age of 12 months, despite a mutation, is actually also a patient included in Rainbow Fish, which means that actually 5 of these patients were included in pre-symptomatic trials. It means that newborn screening and pre-symptomatic help us to conduct pre-symptomatic trials and to demonstrate the best efficacy of drug. So it's not only because we have drugs that are efficient at birth that we should conduct newborn screening, but newborn screening may also help us to understand the best efficacy and the best window of opportunity of these drugs. And then you start discovering new phenotypes. Look, this gentleman was identified by newborn screening at the age of, and he is 20 days old. He is not pre-symptomatic at all. Right? He has severe hypotonia already. Of course, he was deemed to be a normal newborn. But we know today, by newborn screening, that 40 patients with 2 copies of SMN2 present with symptoms at birth. We're not good enough to see it. Of course, when we know that they have SMA, it's very easy. We start looking in the mouth, we start looking for the fasciculation, but if we do not know, we miss the diagnosis. These patients, without newborn screening, would come at the age of 1.5 months in the intensive care unit for pneumonia, right? He was lucky, and actually he's doing quite well. Look, he's celebrating his first birthday as the sitting position, which means that it's a complete different feature, even for these patients with a very early onset form of the disease. Then you could say, okay, cute, fair enough, but very expensive. First, you're giving very expensive drugs to the babies, and then you have to screen. And the screening costs a lot of money, so are you sure that it's cost efficient? Well, to start with, I agree that these drugs are super expensive. This is not the topic of this lecture. But as long as these drugs are approved and that we deliver these drugs, we should do our utmost to make the best use of these drugs, right? They're not going to be cheaper if we go, more expensive if we give them earlier in the life. Of course, the cheapest strategy is to let these patients die. If we let these patients die, they will not cost a lot of money. But if we have a drug that is approved, that is reimbursed, our duty as physician is to use it as best as we can. And we need to think a little bit about the future also. You probably know that in United Kingdom there are 735,000 newborns per year, something like that, which means 72 newborns with SMA. Today we do not screen for SMA in UK, we do not. So which means that we have 70 newborns with SMA. Before we had any drugs for SMA, 44 of them presented with SMA type 1 and died, 23 had SMA type 2 and were wheelchair bound, and 5 had SMA type 3 and were ambulant. This is purely historical. It was 5 years ago. Nowadays we treat these patients. So the current situation today is that out of these 72 newborns with SMA, 19 will die because they are like our little boy that we just saw the video, and they arrived too late. 38 will be sitters and wheelchair bound, and 15 will be walkers. What does it mean? It means that if we had newborn screening, probably we will miss the SMA type 0, the very early form. We will miss the point mutation, because I did not tell you, but 5% of the patients have a heterozygous mutation and a point mutation on the other allele, so they're not detected by PCR, which means that we need to continue to teach the clinical sign of SMA type 1. So 7 patients will have a point mutations and will not be identified, and the others will run in the community. So if I want to compare the 3 situations, that's actually the 3 panels. And if you work in the UK and you know our NHS is a little bit in trouble for the moment, you can say, well, this after 20 years, we are actually building a snowball of patients who need a wheelchair, who need a non-invasive ventilations. Where is the capacity to take care of these patients? Where are the rehabilitation doctors? How are we going to take care of these populations if we do not screen quickly? Then comes the question of money, and there is a previous PhD student in my team in Belgium who made a fantastic job. She counted every single cent, every single penny of a patient, if he's not treated, if he's treated, or if he's identified by newborn screening and then treated. Of course, patients who are treated cost more money than patients that are not treated because of the huge price of the drug. But if you look at every single cost, including medical cost and non-medical cost, you make a big saving in patients identified by newborn screening. So I made some extrapolation for the UK. In the UK, to screen for newborn screening would cost 2,500,000 euro per year. This is a lot of money. But we could save 143,250,000 euro per year, which is a return on investment of 5,739%. It's better than Bitcoins or Amazon share or whatever you want. So I could quickly evaluate that each minute waiting for the NBS in the UK will cost £240, which means that this lecture, 45 minutes, will cost something like £10,000 for this lecture in the UK. So when I got these figures, I called Boris Johnson at that time to tell him, and he resigned. So we went one step further, and we built a lifetime-long Markov model to identify the different health condition of these patients and the costs that are associated. This is a little bit more rigorous in terms of health economic. We could make a model, make several scenarios. This is now published. And what we could figure out is that actually, when you conduct newborn screening and the question is, okay, I've got my drugs on the market, is newborn screening cost effective? You know, we quantify the number of QALYs a year in full quality of life, right? Normally, we are ready to pay something like 30, 40,000 euro per QALY. Newborn screening, you don't pay per QALY. You receive money per QALY. It's not something that costs. It's something that makes money for the society. It is bankable. At that time, Boris Johnson had resigned, so I called Liz Truss to tell her. She resigned. Now, I'm joking, but the situation in the UK is terrible. Have you been in the city to meet this guy, right? It's the dragon, and he's above a bridge. And he is a metaphor of the National Newborn Screening Committee in the UK. Because the story behind this guy is that if he sees a virgin lady on the bridge, he starts moving his tail, which means that he never moves his tail because he's a statue, like. It's like the National Newborn Screening Committee. If they see a disease that they should screen, they move their tail. They never move their tail. So they have what they call a very robust process. And the good thing is that there was recently an all-party parliamentary group that reached the conclusion that the approach in the UK is, it's okay if it's robust, but it should be more pragmatic, right? We should go much faster. Much faster is not difficult because we go very slow, but I'm quite confident that things are going to move. Actually, things are moving everywhere in the world, and Eva, who is chairing this session, has published this paper about the situation in the world and our prediction of the increase of newborn screening. I like this map because one country is missing, and the country that is missing is probably the last one that initiated newborn screening recently in Europe, and this country is Ukraine. Ukraine started newborn screening recently. They identified several patients in the region of Kiev or Lviv, which demonstrates that even in the worst situation in the world, like a war, there is still the possibility to think about the wise way to treat our patients. So there are several publications all over the world, and they all go the same direction. It is easy, it is reliable, it is robust, and it makes money. For those of you who are interested, we have a masterclass in Liège to train for newborn screening and management of these patients. We had 2 different masterclass already, and we are organizing the 3rd one. Just drop me an email if you want to be part of that. Then comes the questions. Okay, fair enough. Newborn screening works, but is it the best strategy? What about carrier screening? Carrier screening would simply say, okay, we want to get married, let's have a look if we have common mutations and if there is, an indication for in vitro fertilization before having a first kid. So carrier screening or newborn screening. So carrier screening has the potential to decrease the incidence of the disease, right? Newborn screening will never decrease the incidence of the disease, so which means that you have probably a better chance to make money. You can apply to all disease carrier screening, all genetic disease, all recessive disease, but you cannot apply for, you can only apply for treatable disease with newborn screening. The problem is that you directly interfere with the reproduction and the reproductive project of people, and causing a ethical dilemma with carrier screening, which you don't with newborn screening. You do not identify neomutations with carrier screening. You do with newborn screening. You do not identify babies born from illegitimate pregnancy, about 1% of the population. We do with newborn screening. You do not identify silent carrier. We do. What is a silent carrier? Well, better than explaining, I will tell you a story, as usual. This is one of the first patients identified in Belgium, and she had 4 copies of SMN2. And then we had a look at the parents, and what happened is that the mom had 2 copies of SMN1, and dad had 1 copy of SMN1. So I became crazy. I could not understand what happened. So what happened actually is that the grandfather had 3 copies of SMN1, and the grandfather 1 copy, the grandmother 3 copies. So actually, the problem of this mom is that the two copies were on the same chromosome. So which means that she was a real carrier. And the funny point is that actually the 3 kids were affected for SMA. So we do not identify silent carrier in carrier screening. And the last and most important problem is that carrier screening is socially and culturally oriented. It has been shown by several studies, and this is from Australia, that the richer you are, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to go to carrier screening. And in the contrary, the less educated, the less wealthy you are, the less likely you are going to get carrier screening. The beauty of newborn screening is that it is universal. You can get every kid, whatever if the parents are rich or educated. And an interesting point for SMA is that carrier screening in Israel, for instance, could not decrease the incidence of spinal muscular atrophy. So my personal conception is that we should not put on one side carrier screening and on the other side newborn screening. We could do both, actually. And first, for those who can, for those who know, for those who understand, for those who agree to go for carrier screening, but we will not identify all patients. The other patients, we need to carry them, to diagnose them by newborn screening in order to be able to reduce the cost and to reduce the burden and to reduce the disability. So this is the story. This is the hope. This is the dream. And now the vision. Let me tell you a story again. This guy comes from Lubumbashi. Lubumbashi is a lovely city in the eastern part of Congo, and he walks like this since he started to walk at the age of 24 months. And so parents who have a little bit of money went to India and got a wrong diagnosis for 10,000 euros of Duchenne, and they were proposed stem cell therapy. And then they had not the money for stem cell therapy, so they sent me an email asking me if I could make stem cell therapy. I said, no, I don't know how to do it. And then one of my colleagues went to Congo, and he said, well, maybe it's spinal muscular atrophy. Of course, it's not spinal muscular atrophy. Finally, they came to Liège, and we identified congenital myasthenia related to DOX7 mutation. And this is the same kit 48 hours after salbutamol that cost €7. 48 hours, right? And nowadays, this guy runs in the street. But this disease is not screened at birth because there is no biomarker. There is nothing you can look at in the blood, right? And if we consider the different causes of myasthenia, and for instance, our 3 patients with DOX7 mutations in Liège, one was identified, we published it in JAMA Neurology, he was identified at the age of 48 years, and he had a lifetime long in the wheelchair. He had a tracheostomy. And the way we identify him is that one day he told us the story, I feel better when I have asthma. When I have asthma, it's the moment in my life when I feel better. I say, why the hell? Do you take steroids? No, it's because his doctor was prescribing salbutamol, right? That's how he was identified. The reviewer did not believe us. He told us, I'm sure you look for something. No, it's just the story of the asthma that identified these patients. But the joke aside, 48 years in the wheelchair, this was published in Atlas News, I mean, lower impact factor. But she spent also 18 years in the wheelchair for a disease that could have been identified at birth. So altogether, these 3 patients, and in Oxford we have more than 30, but these 3 simple patients spent 70 years in the wheelchair, 20 years of invasive ventilation, 30 years of non-invasive ventilations, 5 muscles biopsies, 50 working years lost, social support, house adaptation, and all of this could have been avoided if we screen for congenital myasthenia at birth, but we don't. And the reason why we don't, it's not because it doesn't fit with the criteria of Heinz and Joge. It's just that we screen with metabolic and endocrine vision, but not with a genetic vision. So we started to dream and to say, well, what about molecular newborn screening? If we consider that we don't need a biomarker, and that we could just consider diseases that are going to start early, that are severe, that are treatable, that we can diagnose one way or another. And the most important criteria, which is not on the slide, is for which we have a doctor who is happy to take care of these patients, a doctor who is going to jump on these patients the day they will be identified, because that's the most important. So we start dreaming about baby detect and say, well, let's consider the rocket with which Tintin went on the moon 10 years before the Americans. And we could potentially improve current screening by screening for central hypothyroidism and not only peripheral hypothyroidism. We could screen for all treatable disease of today, like congenital myasthenia, Wilson disease, de Vivo syndrome, neurotransmitter disease. But we could also pave the way for future newborn treatment of Angelman, of Rett, because Angelman, for instance, maybe we have something that works. Maybe we have something that will help these kids, but let's be honest, let's face the truth. I mean, an 18 years old with Angelman will not be transformed by an oligoantisense nucleotide. If we want to get the best chance to this kid, we need to screen early. We need to treat these patients immediately if we want to give them a chance. But we don't have siblings with Angelman. We don't have siblings with Rett. So how are we going to organize the pre-symptomatic trials in Angelman if we do not have newborn screening? That's the vicious circle in which you will not be able to demonstrate the efficacy of pre-symptomatic treatment because you don't have pre-symptomatic patients. Right? But if at one point we break this vicious circle and we are ready to have a system in which you can actually screen for any treatable condition or any condition that could be treatable in the near future, then you have the potential to greatly accelerate the development in rare conditions. So we started to browse literature to discuss with colleagues, and we established a list of 361 genes causing 126 treatable disorders across all the pediatrics, including ophthalmology, nephrology. Most of them are metabolic, many of them are neurologic, and all these genes we could place them on a panel and to screen at birth. So that's our objective in Baby Detect, is to switch the mindset and to switch the technology, and rather than going one by one and to wait to have the entire package of evidence that a disease should be screened, just to add it and to have a better accessibility to clinical trials, to development, and to increase the availability of large newborn screening. So we went to the ethics. Honestly, it was a walk in the park. So they say, well, okay, let's go. We have a website in which you can find a list of the disease with all explanations, and we started to screen September 1st, 2022. A key point was the public involvement. So if you go in a Citadel in Liège, you will see everywhere this type of advertisement. On the website, we could make a deal with the ethics committee to inform the ladies not only with 25 pages of document speaking about GDPR, but more importantly with TikTok-like videos in which you just ask a question and in 10 seconds you get the answer. So the question is, for which disease do you screen? Is it for all diseases? And you get an answer in 5 minutes for Bernard and 10 seconds for the ladies. We have a godfather. It's not Bernard. He's stronger. He's Axel Witsel, quite a good player of soccer in Belgium. Of course, there is a consent. Most of the consent is electronic consent. The ethics committee asked us if possible also to have paper consent, but I can tell you that nowadays all ladies go to video information and electronic consent. So the very last data is that we screened 1,647 babies. We got 168 refusals from parents, so it means that the acceptance rate is 92%. So if you go to a young mother, young father, and you say, well, this is the deal, we could screen, and this is a research, right? It's only a research. We could screen for any treatable condition. You got 92% of approval. And the 8% has nothing to do with genetic. Then nobody told us, well, you know, it's genetic. I'm afraid you're going to look in my... It was like, there is no disease in my family. I've got a son, he's healthy, so there's no reason to have another one who's not healthy. So it was a complete misunderstanding about what is a disease, and unfortunately, it was really culturally defined. We're not the only one with such a vision. There is other projects, including in the UK, the project with whole genome sequencing by Genomic England, a project in Yale, also by whole genome sequencing, The Guardian in New York, that use also targeted sequencing. This is a research. This is really the very first steps of a new way of considering newborn screening. The pending question is, should we go for whole genome sequencing or targeted sequencing? What is the health economic behind? Is it such a good deal like SMA? How do we manage data storage and data access further down the line? How to manage the patient, the variants for which we are unsure. These are all pending questions. The problem is that as long as we do not start, we will not get the answer to these questions. There is one question that is not pending, and the question that is not pending is it the future? It is the future. There is, in my opinion, no other way to understand the development, the management of the rare disease in the next 30 years outside being able to identify quickly target engagement and mechanism of action of drugs, and then to apply in the best window of opportunity. And this is true across a large number of diseases with neurodegenerative disorders or neuromuscular conditions. So as a final vision of this journey, I will just use the metaphor of the cemetery. And rather than filling cemetery with children, we could fill it with disease. And like poliomyelitis that we could make disappear, at least in Europe, and SMA, there are plenty of disease that we could make disappear if collectively we work in a mindset of making shorter, better defined clinical trials, and then being able to move quickly to the best window of opportunity and the pre-symptomatic treatment. I just want to finish this lecture by acknowledging at first my partners in crimes in Belgium for SMA, my research team in Oxford, the team of Liège, and finally the team of Baby Detect. Thank you very much for your attention.